I think you end up weakening the mission when you start chasing things. For example, you might be chasing growth and making decisions that will increase the total number of students at your institution or parishioners in your parish. But if those strategies that you're choosing begin to kind of fall away from that ultimate idea of, are we creating an environment that's supportive of human beings growing in the image of Christ? That's where I think you begin to weaken mission.
If you work for the Catholic Church and want to transform the culture of your parish and put more souls in the pews, we are here to help. I'm John Conson. This is the Catholic Ministry Professionals Podcast, the leadership development podcast for Catholic churches. Today, we're going to talk about stewarding mission, specifically how Catholic leaders can protect and advance the mission of the church through real leadership decisions, especially when maybe alignment is tested. So today, we are joined by Dr. Matthew Draud, who works closely with Catholic institutions. Specifically, he is the president of Brier Cliff University in beautiful Sioux City, Iowa. Dr. Draud, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, I know a little bit about you. You actually, Brier Cliff sponsors the podcast on Siouxland Catholic Radio, and Brier Cliff's my alma mater, so I know all about the institution, but I'd love for you to just share a little bit about who you are and how it is that you ended up leading a Catholic institution such as this, and just what is it that kind of keeps you committed and plugged into the mission of the church through Brier Cliff University.
Yeah. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Covington, Kentucky, really right across the river from Cincinnati, Ohio. I grew up in a family that I was raised in the First Church of Christ. I went to public schools. My dad was a superintendent of schools in Covington, actually. Um, and somewhere along the way, when I was about 14 years old, my mother had decided that, a little bit younger, actually. I guess I was 12 at the time. She decided that public schools in the area were just not the place where she wanted me to get my high school education, and she had me take the exam to see if I could gain admission to a Catholic school in the area called Covington Latin School. And I took the exam and was able to get admitted. And really, kind of, I think that's where, if I really go back to look for the seeds that were sown that led me to where I'm at today, that probably was the first decision that led me here. When I was coming to Latin school, I grew to, recognize some things about the Catholic faith that were different and more fulfilling than the other, tradition that I was following. And both my mother and I both converted to Catholicism while I was a junior at coming to Latin. And it was a combination of a lot of things, but mostly the faculty at Covington Latin and the headmaster, Father Hiley, was just so important in me growing up. And it was just so that was my first kind of foray into the Catholic religion. And I'll never forget the opportunity to study the catechism and go through those formative processes, and that allowed me to have all kinds of conversations about faith that I just hadn't had before. And it was just a meaningful time in my life. And I think that's kind of what got me started. I finished coming to Latin school and went on to go to college at Thomas More College, which is a university quite similar to Briar Cliff in many ways. And through the 4 years at Thomas More, I just really kind of even grew deeper in my Catholic faith. And also, I was a budding scientist at the time. And so I was really struggling, with this idea of faith and science and how those two things might merge. And it really was at Thomas More where I learned about Catholic intellectual tradition. And to me, it was so important to have a rigorous way of exploring, how faith and reason could work together and better answer questions about what it means to be human. And so I think, that's kind of where the beginnings of my own faith journey began, and my journey as a leader. Eventually became I did a master's degree in Louisiana, also studying biology, went on to get a PhD in biology at Lehigh University, and then was, really seeking my first faculty position. And I ended up at Long Island University, which was really a cool opportunity for me to kind of understand access missions at universities where, you're essentially pursuing two things at once. the access to higher education to individuals who might not otherwise be able to have that opportunity, mostly from an economic standpoint. These are students that have first generation low income families that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it. So I loved that missional aspect of Long Island University, and it really started me thinking about where my own calling was, my own vocation. And I love being in the classroom. I love teaching, but I eventually learned that, another calling of mine was to lead. Servant leadership really called to me. And so I left Long Island University after 16 years of serving there as a faculty member, as a department head, as a graduate director. Went on to serve a public school for a while in Savannah, Georgia. Became the department head of biology there for a couple of years before eventually making my way back to faith-based institutions. And I served as the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Siena Heights University in Adrian, Michigan. And that's a Dominican institution. And I just loved it there. I loved serving the mission of the university and working with the Adrian Dominican sisters. And they really kind of brought me back into a love for faith-based institutions. And they taught me about truth telling, and I loved it. I loved being there. I think what's kept me committed this whole time is just, understanding how to serve these communities of people, as I said originally, that might otherwise not have an opportunity for higher education. So that's a little bit about me, John.
Yeah, well, I love that. You had said earlier that there was something that was more fulfilling about the Catholic faith. I wonder if you just could you kind of pull that open a little bit, because I think we need to hear that. Um, how there's something richer, like we talk about the fullness of the faith, and I'd just like you to take a moment to speak into that.
Yeah, I will. I think what really was so meaningful to me at the time, I hinted at this a moment ago, that, I was a budding scientist. And I will tell you that the thing that had me so that kind of made me hungry for what I discovered at coming to Latin school was the idea that not only was I permitted to embrace this sort of skepticism and to me, evidence based learning about the world through the lens of experimental science, right? That's kind of where I've been drawn my entire life, facts and how to uncover facts with controlled experimentation. And my upbringing in the First Church of Christ really was, it forced me or asked me to push that aside and instead replace it with just faith, almost as if those two things were not, but what I learned about the Catholic faith is not only were they compatible, but that I was actually encouraged to push towards the discovery of facts through that experimental lens. But then to understand that that can only go so far, right? There are some questions that cannot be answered with those kinds of approaches. Not that they're not important, but that once you hit you recognize, is what I learned at coming to Latin school and later at Thomas More. You need to recognize when the questions you're asking can no longer be answered by experimentation and then require, a discovery of faith. And so those two things just fit so much better in my life. So I think that's really what it was, John.
All right, man. I really like that. There's kind of a switch that happened then too, where you found yourself thriving, loving, just being kind of soaking in that atmosphere of the Dominican University that you were at, and being in that, and to the point where now you've moved from living in the mission to being responsible to steward the mission now as the president of Brier Cliff.
Yeah.
Can you speak into that a little bit? Because I do think that that's something that our pastors deeply experience, is they fall in love with the faith, they fall in love with Christ and the church and God, and they have a desire to just live in that. And then they go through seminary, and then maybe a few years as an associate pastor, but then eventually they're kind of thrust in this position where they're no longer just living within it, although yes, there's an element of living in it, but they're responsible to steward it, to grow it. Can
Right.
you speak a little bit into what that transition looks and feels like, and just the weight of that as you've experienced it?
Yeah, I mean, it isn't interesting because, as if I look at my own journey, beginning in the classroom, being an instructor and being a faculty member guiding students' research and things like that, the things that you're doing are, you feel very pure in them. You feel like this is a,
Mm.
a real pure journey. And then as you're called to greater levels of leadership, the purity washes away a bit, and reality begins to take over at least part of your daily life, and your decision making becomes grounded in the reality of budgets and the reality of finances and so on. And you can find those things as being um, again, not in harmony with your stewardship of the mission. And to me, I think the hardest lesson I have had, or I force myself to grapple with on a daily basis, is understanding all the realities of budget, understanding all the realities of finance, and keeping an institution sustainable over time. You still have to ask yourself every single day, are the decisions that we're making about our budgets, about our finances, about these things, are they still essentially flowing from Christ's teachings? Are we beginning to orbit other centers of gravity, like rankings, or our revenue, or profit, or whatever? That is a daily struggle where you have to be living in the real, right? You have to make sure that budgets are sustaining the operations that are so important to your mission. But at the same time, you don't want to let that get in the way of just simply asking ourselves, are we still following Christ's teachings? So that's where my daily struggle is. And I imagine other leaders probably have that same kind of, daily issue.
Well, yeah, how do you do that? How do you personally then, kind of dig into that a little bit? How do you hold yourself like the day to day, like, yes, the sustainability of the institution? How do you hold that up against like the long term vision here of we're making disciples, we're grounding people in the life of Christ? Like, how do you personally try to hold those in concert? Like, yes, asking that question, like you said, which I think is so good. Are the decisions we're making still flowing from Christ's teachings? But how do you do that personally? What does that look like on the ground for you?
Well, to me, it's recognizing what Christ's teachings are, right? I mean, it's the value of every human being, and so I think ultimately, if our mission is still, in essence, supporting the growth and development of human beings in the light of Christ, then I think we're doing our job and we're following our mission. And so I think you end up asking yourself all the time that very simple question. Are the decisions we're making, are our operations supportive of an environment in which humans can grow in the image of Christ? And that's kind of the ultimate goal. Now, again, in the daily, you end up with really very detailed decisions about, how you're going to spend these dollars or not spend these dollars, or which programs need to be reviewed very carefully, or which ones are really doing really well and we need to expand them. It's easy. It really is easy to get caught, in the weeds, and forget that ultimately all of this is to create an environment in which humans can grow and thrive. So, but I think, if you it can also be very easy. I will say this. I mean, if you let it be the idea that every decision will ultimately come down to, is this decision good for the human beings that call Brier Cliff home? If that just becomes the last question in every decision you make, you end up having a fairly easy path at the same time.
Okay, I like that. There's kind of that's kind of the bedrock of vision, right? Is you've got these core principles. Even I would say it boils down to one core principle that you kind of need to have that cuts through some of the mess and noise, and allows you to make the good decisions. Okay, on the flip side of that, where do you most often see Catholic institutions, where the church, higher education, whatever it might be, our some of our Catholic high schools and elementary schools, where can we unintentionally sometimes weaken the mission? Not through bad intent, right? Like we can still have really good intentions of doing the best things for the people. What are some of the practices or things though that can unintentionally weaken the mission, through the leadership decisions that are or are not made?
Yeah. And it really is complicated. This will sound simpler and than it really is, but I think you end up weakening the mission when you start chasing things that may make sense through the lens of, let's say, financial sustainability, right? And so, for example, you might be chasing growth, let's say enrollment volume growth, and making decisions that will increase the total number of students at your institution or parishioners in your parish. But if those kind of strategies that you're choosing begin to, kind of fall away from that ultimate idea of, are we creating an environment that's supportive of human beings growing in the image of Christ? That's where I think you begin to weaken mission. Now, I do understand it. I mean, I'm facing this right now at Brier Cliff, where we know one of the things we need to do to make ourselves sustainable for the next century. We're coming up on our end of our first century here in a couple of years. I'm really excited about that. But also making sure we've set the foundation for the next century, right? It's really growing our enrollment back to a point where it's sustainable. So but how do you do that? And how do you do that when you still and have this really supportive environment where you're paying attention to justice and you're paying attention to the common good, you're paying attention to Catholic intellectual tradition, you're paying attention to Franciscan charisms and so on, and you got to do all of that. It's kind of a both and, right? You need to do both of those things, but it's easy. It's really easy when you start, running and looking for ways to grow enrollment. I'm just giving you this one example where you can easily lose sight of that.
Well, and we see that often in parish life too, where we need more people to be able to put on the classes that we need to have for faith formation. And because it's so essential to have these classes, we start to think, well, it doesn't matter who's in front of the room so long as we've got a warm body in there to be
Yeah,
able to, legally and safely have these classes. And then what happens is you've got someone in there who doesn't understand the mission. You end up you
yeah,
create the seat, but you're not putting the right person in the seat. And that can undermine the mission as well. And so I see like all these parallels between
yeah.
what you're saying, which is we need to grow enrollment, but we need to make sure that we are secure enough as an institution and in our vision of what it is we're trying to do here and for these people that we're bringing onto the campus. We're bringing onto the campus the people who believe that this is where they should be and for the right reasons and desiring that which we offer, so that we're not compromising what we offer just to bring people in.
That's such a great way of thinking about it, John. I think you've touched on two really important things there. One is that you've got to curate, um, the faculty and the staff and the employees who believe in the mission, who understand the mission, and who take that as the first and foremost every day when they come to work. And I think we've done that at Briarcliff. I'm so impressed. I've only been here 2 years, but as I intersect with all the faculty and the coaches and the staff members, I mean, this place is filled with people who are deeply committed to the mission. Not all of them are Catholic. I mean, what is interesting about this to me is that we've got people from lots of different faith traditions that come together around a common mission and common goal, and it's wonderful to see that. To me, it is. I mean, I'm Catholic through and through, but it's. I appreciate it so much that other faith traditions can come and land on the same ideas, and maybe they see it through a slightly different lens, but we're looking towards the common good for our students. I love that. So that's one piece you mentioned. The other is, as we recognize we're bringing a larger volume of students to campus, again, they're not all Catholic either. In fact, at our university, we have, I think the last count was we had something like 12 different Christian faith traditions that we see in our student body, in our undergraduate student body. Just think of that. We've got Methodists, we've got Baptists, we've got Presbyterian backgrounds, Lutheran backgrounds. It's very interesting. And of course, we've got Catholics, or a little more than a third of our students are Catholic. But I think that's an opportunity, kind of a both and opportunity to bring all these visions together and understand and what do we share commonly, and that is that we all focus on a Christ centered education. So I love that too. But you want students who are coming here because they want to be at Briarcliff, not just because they can play football here, but they don't care much about the mission, or they can get a degree in business here, but they don't care much about the mission. I love our students. I will tell you that the of all the universities that I've served, and been quite a number of them, I have never encountered a student body more focused than the student body that we have here at Briarcliff. And I mean, I know you're an alum, so maybe I'm just I'm just giving you the thumbs up. But no, really, this is an incredible community of students. Um, here's one way that I've tried to describe it to colleagues that ask me about it. They're just so unafraid of being intellectually curious. And I think that has to be because of the environment that the faculty and staff have created to allow that, right? To allow students to ask difficult questions and confront difficult ideas together, even though they might be coming from very different perspectives. So I think you're exactly right. Maybe I'm rambling a little bit here, but I mean your reflection kind of teed off that thought in my head. So
Well, no, and I appreciate your insights on that because I do think that one thing that can be tough for people who are they're not in the day-to-day mix
Mhm.
of making the thing work, right? And this is for our pastors, this is for people who run in, schools, because I've worked with multiple schools, multiple parish teams, and people always have a strong opinion on how we should do the things that we do. And it can be really easy to look at the diversity of the things that are different in the people, right? Not everybody on the staff is Catholic. Not everybody on the student body is Catholic. Well, maybe that means it's being watered down,
Right,
And
right.
I think that can be a real strong temptation, especially if you don't see the conversations that happen behind the closed doors that guide the ship. And it can be really easy to attach judgments to that or the ideal. Like it's really great, like any marriage, even any marriage. You can look at what a marriage is supposed to be and you can measure your marriage against that. At the end of the day, though, you still have two people trying to row in the same direction despite all their differences, right?
Yeah.
But one thing I will say, is and obviously I'm about 20 years removed from my time at Brier Cliff, but something that still stays with me that I think has been really grounded and essential is its Franciscan heritage,
Mhm.
and it's something that when you really do lead the culture of an institution and you try to do it well and you do it intentionally, the identity of Saint Francis was something that still to me is deeply imprinted in my heart. And I didn't realize it was happening because I had to do all the little classes of this is who Saint Francis is and this is his life and blah 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 blah. And
Right.
as a student, you're just like, again with this guy.
Another one, yeah.
But I had the opportunity to go to Italy, like a tour that was kind of set up through the college. And we went to Assisi, and all of a sudden, all these little nuggets, these little pieces that just over the years that I had been there, I was in this place that made all those little pieces concrete. And I remember sitting before the tomb of Saint Francis and just going, "Oh, this is what they're talking about." And that is
Yeah,
that
very
there's just something to that, and even to the point where, like, my favorite crucifix, it's the one that's behind you, the San Damiano crucifix, and so we realize that there's all these pieces that lead us and guide us, they imprint on our heart, and, like, I don't want people to think that when we're saying, "Who's the person that should be at Briar Cliff?" that there's some template, and if you don't fit, you're wrong.
right.
There's also that underlying current of desire that you're cultivating and guiding in a direction, and I think that that is so important. That has to be a part of that journey of faith.
Well, I think it's, when you think about having 2/3 of your students that don't come from Catholic backgrounds, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to grow knowledge about what the Catholic faith means. And just I mean, that's what was so important to me when I was at Covington Latin, that I learned about the Catholic faith, and it really just opened my eyes to things I hadn't seen through my own faith. I think it's a great opportunity for us to have those communities working together. And, I've mentioned Catholic faith traditions, but we also have Christian faith traditions, but we also have non-Christian faith tradition students on campus too. Additional opportunities for growth and understanding, and having good conversations across the.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I imagine so. This is something I do want to talk about because, sort of what we alluded to before, right? You've got different people, different backgrounds, different traditions, and yet they're all aligned under this Catholic institution. And so I'm sure there are times where people aren't quite on the same page, right? As we're talking about the direction we go. So I want you to talk a little bit though. I mean, I imagine that conflict is healthy if it's done well. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I one thing I have noticed, particularly, this podcast serves a lot of parish ministry professionals, Catholic ministry professionals. And one thing that often happens is that we would rather keep the peace, maintain the peace, than have the necessary discussion and make the necessary decision that moves things forward despite the differing opinions and stuff. So how do you step into healthy conflict in such a way that it becomes critical? It becomes a necessary part of protecting and advancing the Catholic mission in all of that.
Yeah. This is interesting. I think that universities, first and foremost, were created to be a place where you can confront very perplexing and vexing problems for humans, right? That's really why universities evolved and what they came to serve, really. So, just the idea that healthy conflict, it's kind of, where mission is either protected or traded away. One of the two. Either you're going to avoid it And in case if you do, I think you're really kind of trading your mission away versus not leaning. I'm not suggesting that everything has to be a conflict, but if we can't have those healthy conversations where maybe good and right minds are disagreeing, seeing it through a different lens, I think that's trading your mission away. That's our opportunity to really dig into the mission. Uh, there was a journal, doesn't exist anymore, but it's back in the 60s and 70s. There was a journal, an academic journal called Confrontation, and when I was at Long Island University, I would go to the library sometimes and pull those out, and it was just intriguing to see kind of the world's big questions lived out on the pages of this journal called Confrontation. And it was, I don't know, it really opened my eyes to two things. One is being very, very brave about asking difficult questions and recognizing that it's okay. It's okay to ask a difficult question. And even if you might think, well, that might hurt someone's feelings if I ask this question, it's better to ask the question than to sit on it. And secondly, to recognize it's okay to have an opposite opinion from somebody, and you don't have to think of them less because their opinion is different than yours. I think that's one of the things that makes these faith-based institutions so powerful, is it allows us to recognize the uniqueness of others through understanding that there's visions about the world. So I think you're right. If you're an institution or any kind of enterprise that is avoiding conflict, you're probably running away from your mission rather than living into it.
Yeah, one of the ways that we see that happen really concretely in the church, and right now seems to kind of be the time this is becoming more fully manifest, is that you have what, for lack of a better word, we kind of term the old guard on parish staffs, and
Yeah.
then and these are people who were asked to step into a position that was open, and they maybe were asked because they were the most available and most dedicated volunteer, and so the pastor was like, "Hey, you seem really committed to this. Would you step into this bigger role?" And they stepped in. They have done a great job. They have done their absolute best. They've gotten certifications. They've used the best, most current resources that were available. But then in the last 10, 15, 20 years, you've had this growth in more formalized leadership career paths for church leadership. So people who get degrees in Catholic studies, you have people who
Yeah.
have degrees in pastoral ministry, they have degrees in ministry, that didn't exist 20 years ago. And so they come in with these really fresh ideas and new ideas. And what happens is this tension between the two, where the old guard feels like, we built this thing, like I built this thing, and now you're telling me it's garbage and we need to change everything. And the new people are coming in and they're saying, I just see that you don't seem energized about the mission anymore, and I have all these fresh takes, and I want to do this, and so they're seeing kind of what you said, which is that they're maybe unintentionally thinking less of the other, or
Mhm.
at least feeling like the other person doesn't understand, and it feels like a personal attack instead of
Right.
just two different ways of approaching the same conversation, two different ways of approaching the same problem. So I'm wondering if you could speak into that reality a little bit, just for our pastors, because our pastors don't have like often formal leadership training in the same way, or experience in so many different, leadership levels that you see in a more like a school institution that's got some more of that leadership development baked into it. So I wonder if you could speak into that tension a little bit.
Yeah, I think I have something that's kind of symmetric to that. I have, because of my kind of growth in my leadership journey, going from a department head to a dean to a provost and eventually to president. Each one of those was an opportunity to move to a new institution and take on new, responsibilities. And you're always kind of tempted to come to a new institution and say, "Oh, well, why are you doing it that way? That's not the way I've seen it done in the past. If we do it this way, we'll get a better outcome." And as my journey in leadership has moved along, I have learned something really important, which is that, yeah, you can walk into a new institution, find things that are not working very well. Even the people that are there will say, "Hey, this isn't working very well. I'm unsatisfied with whatever's going on." Your temptation is to say, "Well, I've seen it done this way, so let's just do it this way," rather than digging a little more deeply into, well, let's understand why in the first place we were doing it this way. Why did you do it this way? And what I've learned over time is, rather than just walking into a new role And even if you got good training, which I think did bring into each role to say, I think you're doing it wrong. Let's do it this way instead. Flip that. First, ask really good questions and really understand with close listening. Why did the institution or why has the church done it in this way in the past? And really help the person that's been there frame that to the point where they're ready to say, hey, maybe it is worth exploring a new direction here. But it's a two-way street. And it's both the person coming in from the outside saying, oh, these things are broken, let's fix them. And here's the new way to do it. Uh, Pausing and learning, first of all, why did we do it this way? And also the person who's there embedded in that system to be open to new ways of thinking. And it requires both. And if both of those things come together at the same time, you really can create new, powerful things. It's taken me a while to get there, to be honest with you. When I was a dean, I was far more, I know how to do this. You hired me to do it. I'm going to fix it. Right? Even though people would be upset by it, I would say, well, I know what's best for you. It was a terrible, terrible decision, to be honest with you. And I learned from that. When I became a provost, I was much better at flexibly asking myself, I know I want to move in this direction, but I need to first understand why it's been done this way. So I don't know. It's a tension that I've seen before. And my encouragement would be for both sides to kind of see, well, how can I adjust? Yes, I'm familiar with what we've been doing, but I'm also unsatisfied with the result from it. So maybe that does mean that we need to explore new things. And then for the other to say, well, but there's probably some good, important reason why the institution has always done it this way. So what is it? Let me understand that before I try to suggest new things.
It's kind of the adult version of when you were a kid and you'd get in a fight with your brother, and whatever version your family had of basically taking the oversized shirt and put you both in and say, "Work it out."
Yeah, yeah.
You're gonna sit on this rug together until you get along.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I hadn't. I would. My family didn't do that. I
Oh,
probably could, but I like it.
yeah, no, mine neither. No, mine neither. Don't tell anyone.
That-
But there's just an element of like they actually typically, again, I think there's such an element of it feels like a personal attack
yeah,
that we can't see around it. But when we get around a table and we talk about why, we realize we're both doing these opposite things for the same reason. And when we realize that you're not attacking me, you're just approaching the same problem differently,
right.
suddenly now we're on the same page and we can find a solution together.
That's great, John. I think you're right. It's like finding the common goal. We definitely have the common goal where we're trying to achieve the same thing. We're just doing it in very different ways. Yeah, I think that's really good. It's to me, it looks like structured dialogue, making sure you're really closely listening and asking good questions. I think it's developing clear processes to make sure information is exchanged thoroughly, transparently. And then if you're able to do that, and you really talk about aspirations and admit failures and so on, you really can make great progress.
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. Asking good questions just to understand why. Why are we doing this thing? Which goes back even to what we talked about at the beginning, right? Why are we doing everything we're doing? And for you, right, it boils down to, is this the best thing for the people that are here?
Right.
Yes or no? And then there's got to be kind of a concrete answer to that and a justification. But we have to understand that we have to break that open. I'm kind of wondering, well, how do you structurally, as an institution, because you've got your staff, and that's everyone from teachers to people who do the maintenance and all that stuff. How do you communicate and really help them to take ownership of this mission and this reality, like from the top down? Do you guys do like town hall meetings, or it's just like all the staff, like we're all here, we're going to do this workshop moment together? How do you guys handle that to make sure that it is very clear from top to bottom, this is who we are and what we do?
Yeah. Well, I arrived at Brier Cliff in July of 2024, and it was an institution struggling, to be just, totally honest. I mean, from a financial standpoint, it was a real struggle. And that's not unique. I mean, there are so many institutions across the country, not just Catholic ones, not just faith based ones, but that are really struggling financially right now. And so I wasn't particularly put off by the notion. I knew it ahead of time before I took the job. But I did realize really quickly that the only way that we were going to get back to a more grounded path towards recovery was through what I refer to, and I still refer to it as radical transparency. The idea is that we've got to totally tell the story, understand where decisions have led us into places we don't want to be, and how to fix those. But if you don't understand what's actually broken, it's impossible to invest in fixing it, as a person. So to me, that radical transparency was the only arrow in my quiver. That's the way I refer to many people. And I think it really has served us really well. It's uncomfortable sometimes, when you have to go back and show, well, here's what's happened over the past 20 years at Brier Cliff, and you see this incredible reduction in enrollment volume over time and the loss of tuition revenue because of high discounting and all of the things that we uncovered and have to go tell that story, not just on your own campus, but then in the community as well, because these stories have a way of propagating off campus. And suddenly the entire community believes they know something about the institution that may or may not be true. So the only way to really get that back is to go tell the story honestly and truthfully and transparently. And that's been my path all along. So you mentioned, open forums. Yeah, after every single board meeting, and we have 4 of them a year, we have an open forum where we invite every single person into the room and transparently talk about what the board has discussed, where our budgets are, what our strategies are, where we're achieving, where we're failing. I'm very, very transparent about all that. And I believe it's built a lot of goodwill from our faculty and our staff to say, I at least understand where we are right now. That helps me understand the decisions that are being made better. And I think it's really rallying us around a common goal. And the common goal, the one we always share with one another, is the most important thing are outcomes for our students. And that starts with, what is their experience like? If they're coming in to our campus and having a good experience that's helping them personally develop, again, in the light of Christ, then I think we are doing our job. That's kind of how we're doing it, through radical transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. And that harkens back to like the earliest days of Catholic ministry professionals. Like clear, consistent, transparent communication. That's like the bare minimum for good leadership, because leadership involves influence, and you only have influence if somebody trusts you to influence them, right? It's all about trust at the end of the day, and clarity and consistency, transparency. That's all a part of it, because and your system is uniquely designed to give you the results you have. So if this problem, enrollment, is the problem we have, well, we have to realize our system is producing that. But
Exactly.
but again, if you wanna lead them out of that, you have to know where you're going and why, and that's a big piece of it too, is, like, people will follow a leader, but only if they know where they're going and why they're going there, and so that's just that sums up so much of what you said so far. I'm wondering, is there, as we kind of like try to land this plane here, is there a story, a moment with a student or a staff member? I just want to give you an opportunity to share a story that kind of it captures your heart of like, this is why I get out of bed every day and I fight for this institution, for these people.
Oh my gosh, there's so many stories. There
Yep.
really are, and I would start, with the Sisters of St. Francis who founded this institution back in 1930. When I look at their lives of service and the way they have given everything to serve the common good, that to me is what gets me up and brings me to work every single day. The that's just so inspiring to me. And it is the essence of Brier Cliff University. It's what still lives on this hill today. And that's really, the thing that wakes me up every morning and says, hey, this is worth it. We need to go work really hard to make this a great, great institution that serves students so well. And then when I look at our students and see those whose lives are truly being transformed. Last year I remember one of the students who was our speaker at commencement, relayed these stories of really in his early childhood not having any, thinking that there would be any possibility of going to college, right? And eventually he got through high school, didn't do very well, really, honestly, didn't do very well. Found it, incredibly, what a great opportunity it was for Briarcliff to say, we're gonna take a chance on you. We see something in you, and we're gonna take a chance on you. It's exactly the words he used, and he said that inspired him, to actually do the work, to show up every day and do the work. And he grew. And he grew in that, and with all of the support from this institution, from its faculty, from coaches. He was an athlete here as well. But he relayed stories even from like financial aid staff members that were so important to him, and student accounts, that helped him out with the payment plans and all of the things. He just said, this kind of wrapping our arms around him to give him this opportunity. What was so amazing is that, not only did he graduate, but he also gained enrollment in a medical school. And I just heard back from him about a month ago or so, and his first year in a medical school has gone incredibly well. And he said, I give all this back to Briar Cliff for preparing me for this. So if you start thinking about that, and that's just one example, we had 200 students cross the stage yesterday or a couple of days ago at graduation, and I think about every one of their stories and how we're transforming lives. It's incredible. So I know that the mission of Brier Cliff University, we're living it out. I know that, and I know it's worthwhile, and yeah, it just keeps me going.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Draud, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, sharing the stories, sharing your heart with the mission. I want to thank you for supporting our podcast as well. That's been a huge gift to me.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, so important that these messages get out, and thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. And is there anywhere you want to invite listeners if something you said today like sparked their heart or sparked a question that you want to invite them to reach out to you, connect with the work you do, learn more about it?
Oh yeah, please. I one thing that I will tell you is I'm an open book. So when people reach out, either through email or phone calls, whatever, I'm happy to talk about Briar Cliff, where we're headed. Yeah, I would strongly encourage people to reach out, and also those who think there may be students that could take advantage of this environment. I would really encourage them to take a look and to see what we have to offer. So much to offer here at Briar Cliff, and I think it's such a great environment for students to grow and develop, and and become better versions of themselves.
And I'll say too, I mean, beyond just all the awesome things you're talking about, it's a beautiful campus.
It is, yeah,
Just objectively beautiful. And that was one of the things I had gone on a visit, felt very positive about it, but I landed on campus and I was like, yeah, this is where I could be. I was a small town, I was a farm kid. And you get there and like even though it's like nestled in Sioux City,
yeah.
it doesn't feel like you're in a city. You're kind of up on the sanctuary of a hill,
Yeah.
and
A
surrounded
little
by
piece of
nature.
prairie, and yeah,
Mhm.
you're right. I come up in the morning, and I just outside of noon, and you'll know the campus pretty well, but it overlooks this hill, and as the sun comes up, sometimes I find it difficult to get out of my car just to come in every morning, just because I get to sit there and watch the sun rise over the city, and you're right, beautiful campus.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Dr. Drought, thank you again for being on the podcast.
Thanks, John.
And I want to thank you all for listening to this episode. If you found it helpful, don't let it be just another good idea. Text these things to a priest or a friend in ministry that could benefit and start the conversation today. And with that, we'll see you in the vineyard.